Welcome to the free online workshop with Pivot Point. My name's Julie Kratz, and I will be leading you through an exercise on Leader is Coach tools to elevate the engagement of your team. We are so excited to be with you today and to engage with you. We will be using the chat feature throughout the discussion, so be sure to join there. I want to hear from you. So, with that said, stories, ideas, questions, feel free to chime in at any point. I'll be monitoring the chat feature and periodically taking breaks to get your feedback. Coaching is a tool that is underutilized for many leaders today, and I certainly hope this gives you enough of a flavor for coaching and what it is, and more importantly, what it is not, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about that and that you can walk away with actionable tools and tips. So at the end of the hour, we'll wrap up with commitments, and I'll save plenty of time for some open Q&A and some scenario dialogue. If you've got some burning scenarios, some difficult people you want to practice coaching with, I've heard many of stories. So before I do that, about me, Julie Kratz, I am founder and CEO at Pivot Point. Our business exists to develop inclusive leaders, train women on building winning career game plans while promoting equality in the workplace. And so we do a variety of things around leadership development, especially inclusive leadership, what it means to be an ally in the workplace and lead like an ally, and also tools specifically for women around leadership and career development. But we also work with men because a couple of years ago, I wrote a book called One, How Male Allies Support Women for Gender Equality. It is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I'm not going to talk as much about this, but I will say one of the number one ally attributes is listening and asking questions and being curious, which I cannot think of better attributes of a coach as well. So there is definitely a synonymous relationship, I will say, between being an ally and being a coach. And I should mention all of the work I've been doing to date. If we haven't gotten a chance to know one another one-on-one or in a group setting before, I spent 12 years in corporate America being curious about what it took to promote equality in the workplace. And as a woman leader, there were a number of setbacks that I faced that I just don't think I want other women to have to face. And I took on coaching as a part of my business. I got my coaching certification 5 years ago. So what you're going to see is a window into kind of that coaching credential certification and what it takes to learn these skills. I will say it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to learn. But that doesn't mean it has to be hard. The true art is practicing it after today. So I'd be remiss if I did not mention my real purpose for the work I do. So promoting equality and especially gender equality in the workplace really is near and dear to my heart because my daughter Jane is 5 years old. And the most recent data that we can see on gender equality in the workplace is that it will not be achieved. The latest data said 282 years. Can you believe that? 282 years. I'm going to go with the UN report that had 2080 throw out there as a little better case scenario. But still, she would be 67 years old, and I'm really just not okay with that. So think about the little people in your life and how you can lead like an ally and model inclusive leadership so that they can succeed someday. It's certainly a workplace where equality is always an opportunity. So I wanted to start with an icebreaker. I know that many have many definitions about what a coach is and what it means when we say leader is coach. What does that mean to you? So if you could, bear with me if you're in a private spot and you feel comfortable doing this, close your eyes. Envision what a coach looks like to you. So what does a coach do? What does a coach say? What are words you would use to describe a coach? So this is the interactive piece. So I want to hear from you on the chat. We've got too many people on the line to do live voice. So please, we got all 100 on. So we are capped out. If you could, just jump on the chat and share your thoughts. I love hearing the things that you all think are what it means to be a coach. Ooh, these are all getting fun. Motivator, motivate, challenging, encouraging, supportive, honest. Yes, inspires new ideas. I like that. Powerful questions, encourager, helps you do things you didn't think you could. Oh, yeah, they see something in you maybe you didn't see in yourself before. Support and inspire. You've got this. That's fun. I love the team effort there. Encouraging, challenges assumptions, gets to the point, helps to take performance to the next level. Constructive feedback helps you think outside the box. That's so good. Give specific feedback. Yeah. So we're going to talk about feedback models. The first thing I'll say about that is that if someone's not self-aware, so if you think the coaching conversation is going to be a surprise, start with some feedback first. Otherwise, you might go down a path of which they are not aware of what the issue is. They're like, oh, everything's great. Like, that's not a good case scenario for a coaching conversation. So feedback is a great complement to the coaching model. Helps you identify options to harness strengths. Yeah, helps me become the best version of myself through feedback, support, listening, and encouraging. Ooh, put it all together. I appreciate that. This is awesome. Excellent participation. So do keep it up. We learn a lot, not just from the content I'm going to share with you today that I've been teaching for many, many years. Excuse me. But what I will say is that you learn a lot from one another. And I think the thing you'll learn from the other leaders on the line today is that you're not alone. You know, every leader is wrestling with challenges. The number one thing I hear, in fact, from today's leader is, I have so much vying for my time. Like, how do I sit down and have a tough conversation? So if that describes an average work day for you or an average week, you certainly are not alone. And these tools can really help you. So practice using them. So be thinking as we're going through these exercises, yes, internalize the concept, but more importantly, internalize what does it mean for you? So what does this mean on your leadership journey? How could this help you be even better of a leader? Oftentimes when I'm working with clients, I'm brought in to help you be better. I am not brought in to fix you, to help you be a different kind of leader than the kind of leader that's authentic to you. I'm really helping just strengthen those strengths that are already there. And I will say, when my clients get good at coaching their teams, they see amazing results. They number one benefit is they get out of what I call firefighter mode, having to solve your team's problems. Does that sound like you? To get text messages, late night phone calls, emails, asking questions you think they know the answers to? Well, if that is the case, coaching is one of the best tools to help prevent that behavior. So specifically what we're going to unpack today, the 3 learning objectives that we promised you in the description, are distinguish the role of leader versus coach and know when to tell versus when to ask your team. And thirdly, utilize the GROW model of coaching to coach your team to success. And I should mention, for those of you who saw the description, Stephanie Wood had every intention of joining today, and she was not able to make it. So I do apologize, but the good news is I've got all these 3 bullet points covered. She was going to cover the first 2, and I was going to go through the GROW model, but now I get to talk about all of them, which is kind of fun. So I first want to start is, what is it? Okay, so you told me what you thought a coach was, and I would agree with the majority of what you shared. You know, supportive, gives feedback, helps you see something you didn't see. I would offer a few other bullet points that I'm sharing on the slide here. So I'm asking, this is really a question for you. So jump on the chat and share, look at these lists. This is my definition of what a leader is versus what a coach is. And so the first one, I'll just explain this. And as I'm doing so, jump on the chat and share, what differences you see, maybe what similarities, what are similar about these lists? Because there are differences, but there are maybe some similarities there that I've kind of seeded. So the first line I'll cover is, first, a leader gives feedback. And so you shared that really nicely. And a coach may give feedback. So oftentimes I come in and do 360s as a part of my coaching process, and that's feedback, right? That's feedback from other people that I'm packaging for them. The way a coach may give feedback might be different because their vantage point is different. So when you're in coaching mode, a lot of times you're helping promote what I call self-discovery. So you're helping them see something that they may not have yet acknowledged, but you're helping them see it for themselves. So you're doing a lot less telling and you're doing a lot more asking, which brings us to the second point. A lot of times when I described what is an inclusive leader, what does a good leader look like, the phrase that everyone uses, leads by example. And in other words, models the way for the team. So very much synonymous with the Leadership Challenge, if anyone's familiar with that book, modeling the way, leading by example. Showing them what good looks like is another way I like to say that. Versus coach holds some space for their team to learn and grow. So the difference here is where the best coaches thrive is they hold space and they create it and they hold it, meaning there's a lot of self-reflection time in the coaching process. It is a slower conversation. It is not a one and done conversation. It is an ongoing conversation because we have to revisit what we commit to truly learn and grow. That's where the growth happens, is after the session, practicing what we talked about. And the third point here that you're saying is tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And this is a bit of feedback too, especially the constructive kind. I when I talk about allies and what it means to lead like an ally, it is not always pleasant. I've had my allies tell me things like, "You look tired." That didn't feel good, but maybe I needed to hear that so that I would get back to practicing better self-care, right? And our allies aren't trying to be mean as a leader. You're not trying to be mean, but you're giving helpful feedback. People cannot see themselves, so they often don't know the impact of their behavior. They are not sure how they physically come across. So you have a vantage point that they don't have as a leader, and so you need to tell them stuff that might be unpleasant sometimes. And coaching requires this skill. And we're going to talk about actively listening because the research shows even when we're actively listening, we hear 50% of what's really being said. So, despite the best listeners being out there, I would argue that you're still missing a lot of information. And so, how do you hold that space so that you're really soaking in what the person says when you ask those powerful questions? And a leader guides you to common goals, right? A leader's job, a lot of times, has business results associated with it. So much productivity, quality, client satisfaction, whatever the metric is that you're held accountable to, that's the leader's job to make sure that you're aligned to that. And your job, your daily tasks are making sure we hit our common goals so that there's this mutual understanding of what good looks like. A coach is going to ask you rather than tell you you're not meeting your goal. A coach, I would offer, would ask you more like, what do you think is missing? What do you think we could do better here? Those types of questions. We'll dig into a whole plethora of those questions. And the last piece is challenging you to be better. And many of you said that in the chat box about a coach. It is challenging you to be a better version of yourself. You wouldn't pursue coaching if you were okay with version 1.0. You want to be version 2.0. And so what does it take to get there? And some coaching can help you get there. And then a coach, one of the other skills we're going to talk about is playbacks. So plays back what they heard you say. And so a very good coach listens to keywords you said and affirms them in a way. And you may know, think about those coaches, those leaders that were really good coaches for you in a past life or a current life. Didn't they? They said, I heard you say this, right? What I'm hearing you say. So we'll talk through some of those sentence constructs and how to play back really effectively as a coach. So the question I've got going on here, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat, what's different about these lists? What do you see as the same? What do you see as different? And these are my definitions. These are by no means the final definition, but this is what I see in the classroom and in my coaching clients as slightly different, but I would argue a little bit of overlap too. So what do you think? What's different? What's the same? Who wants to jump in? Oh, awesome. Great. Great exchanges coming here. So two-way versus one-way. Yeah, there's a lot more telling on the leader side, isn't there? There's a lot more asking in two-way on the coaching side. Same. They're both looking for growth from their employee. Yeah. Yeah. Different ways to achieve growth. Good, good, good. A coach helps you become self-directed person by keeping the light on them. Yeah. Yeah. Keeping the light on them. I like that analogy. Both sets of skills are important. And have uses. Yep. Different applications. Tells versus supports. Yep. And in the situational leadership model, which I'm going to cover in the next slide, it'll really draw that comparison very nicely. So good preview, Cami. Coaches are more motivators. I want to be want to discover themselves. Yeah. A coach is not going to tell you a lot. They're not going to give you a lot of advice. That's the biggest difference. And I've had friends that I'm like, oh, well, I'm coaching my employee. And I'm like, they tell me about the conversation. I was like, you just gave them a bunch of advice. That is not what a coach does. Yeah. Coaching is slower. Yeah. A leader is more direct. I like that. I like that. Yep. They are different. Perfect. This is really good stuff. So keep that thought process going because I might already starting to be undoing some of your perceptions of what it means to be a coach. And think about your own coaching style. I think these bullet points adequately describe what I think makes an effective coach, but your coaching style might be a little bit different. So there's not a one size fits all to this. I will say, according to the International Coaching Federation, the official organization. So if you're interested in any credentialing or certification, that is definitely the place to go to. You want to make sure the ICF has approved your program. But what I will say is they have competencies that very much align with these. So I referenced that when building this slide, and then really tried to delineate, okay, what does a leader do in addition to, or maybe a different method. So I think what I'm hearing is a bit more direct on the leader side, a little bit more of the telling on this side, more supportive on this side, and a slower process. And I agree, coaching takes time, and this is why people don't do it. We want instant results. So we want to sit down with our employee and just hammer them. This isn't going well. Do this, do this, do this. And we hope they just march out of our office and miraculously change overnight. I haven't seen that work yet, but if it's worked for you, good for you. I would argue the opposite approach is much more effective if you have a troubled employee, somebody that's not hitting the mark. Giving them some feedback, which we'll talk about a feedback model, but then getting into some hard questions about what's preventing you from being successful here. Right? What does success look like? What is preventing you from getting there? So we'll talk through a cascade of questions that you can really, again, put in your back pocket and use to have a tough conversation. So the second learning objective we had for you today was when to ask versus when to tell. And so what you're seeing here is a diagram that's based off of situational leadership. So if you've seen the tool out there, Ken Blanchard is a thought leader in this space. It's been around for decades. I basically took his information and made it a lot more simple because instead of the competence versus commitment model, which I find very confusing, to be quite honest, because words are really similar and the colors are hard to follow. So I simplified it. And if this helps you, this helps me. And this is what I teach in my leadership classes is a skill versus will diagnosis. So I want you to think about one of your employees. And I don't want you to think about them as an overall employee. It's really about a task or a goal at hand. So usually when I work with leaders, they have a basket of maybe 3 to 5 key tasks or goals that employee is responsible for. So isolate one of those tasks. Maybe it's running reports. Maybe it's drawing insights from data. Maybe it's presentation skills, whatever it is. But I want you to hone in on a specific skill, for someone on your team. And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, do they have the skill or do they not have the skill? So have you seen them do it before, right? On a past performance review, did they demonstrate competence in that area? So that's the first, this is the area on the bottom. So if you imagine this as your x-axis, for example, we love 2x2s as consultants, but I promise this one's good. So first is isolate the task and then think about skill or no skill, okay? And then the second question you're going to ask is on the y-axis over here. Do they have the will or no will? Okay, so when I say will, I mean motivation. I mean confidence. I mean they smile when they're doing the task or when you ask them to do the task. And this is going to tell you a couple of things as a leader, what to do as a leader. So when you have no skill over here, I'm going to start over here. I'm going to go kind of backwards and around. So if you isolate a task for somebody and they do not have the demonstrated skill, so they've never done it before. You've never seen them do it well. They struggle big time. They just don't seem like it's something that's, maybe in their natural talent set. Although I would argue most skills can be developed over time. But right now, current snapshot in time, not demonstrating that they have the skill set more than 50% of the time. Okay. Maybe sometimes they get it, but they make a lot of mistakes. So that type of thing. And let's keep ourselves on mute. I'm hearing some background noise there. So here is no skill, okay? Here's the thing though, if you look over here, this box has will. So what's going on? This might be this tends to be newer employees or newer to a task or position. Again, isolate the task, not the person. So you want to tell this person. So and on the column before in leadership, yeah, a lot of that directive behavior, feedback, hand-holding, very specific instructions and guidelines. Absolutely. That works for somebody that doesn't have the skill but is excited. So think about an enthusiastic beginner. Think about that person when they first start doing a task. They're so gung-ho and excited, and you're like, oh, just wait. Because what happens next, and this is the quadrant where they still don't have the skill, but now they've zapped their will, is you got to do asking and telling. So you actually have to do the combo of leading and coaching. So it's a little bit of both of those columns room for where you're coaching and you're directing. So you're giving them specific directions, but you're also giving them some space to learn because you want to get them to the point where they learn and they don't need you all the time. You don't have to spoon feed them all the pieces of information. So this is probably the hardest part because it's like a balancing act. I'm going to ask, I'm going to tell, I'm going to ask, I'm going to tell, back and forth until they get it. Because at which point you want to back off is when they actually develop the skill set. They still don't have the will. They're still not fired up about it. But now they've kind of crossed this threshold where they know better. And this set of employees, when you fall into this category, this is where coaching is going to be the most powerful. The GROW model that I'm going to share with you is going to be the most powerful when someone knows what they're supposed to do, but they don't have the confidence or commitment to do it. So this also is synonymous with a disengaged employee. And again, it's not that person overall, it's the task, but I would say this tends to be the biggest challenge for today's leader is they know what they're supposed to do, and gosh darn it, they are not doing it right consistently, and they're grumpy. Right? Sound familiar? Anybody have one of those? These usually are the difficult people conversation focuses. So this is why the GROW model works. It really does work when it's held effectively. And it doesn't mean the person miraculously changes. Sometimes they self-select out of the organization because the role is not a good fit for them or the culture is not a good fit for them. So not all attrition is bad. And here where they have the skill and they have the will, delegate. Get out of their way. Don't do either one. I mean, you don't want to ignore these people. I've had that happen to me in roles before because they can regress and slide back over here and become demotivated. But I would argue challenge these people, delegate these people. These are the people that are probably high potential that you want to promote as soon as possible. And so get out of their way, delegate, don't micromanage these people that will disengage them. That's the biggest mistake you can make with those people. So thinking about this, I'm curious, if you were to diagnose when to ask versus when to tell as a leader, another chat opportunity here, how do you know if someone has the skill? So on the x-axis here, how would you put them into the skill category versus the will category? And then I also want to hear from you the will category. So pick either one. How would you know somebody has skill? How would you know somebody has will? So just jump on the chat and share your perspectives there. And I will tell you, my clients, this is one of the top questions I get asked in today's inclusive leadership environment and really wanting to get the best out of every people, having a really low unemployment rate. This is a problem because you're like, I don't know how this person wants me to lead them. This is a great framework to understand. Will, always up for a challenge, seeks the opportunity. Yeah. That usually shows that someone's motivated. They raise their hand a lot. Yeah. I like to say, when you ask them to do something, they smile, they don't frown. Yeah. Previous role or past successes, that would transferable skills are big for the skill set. Yep. Have you done the task before? How did it go? Yep. That's a great one, Laura. Katie said, skill, you have observed them doing the activity at some point. And then the will is they're negative. Yeah. Didn't have a negative attitude. The will, positive outlook. Yes. Positive outlook about the task. These are great. So a couple things I'm hearing is attitude is also synonymous with will. I would agree with that. Confidence is too. Sometimes it's not that they're grumpy. They just don't have the confidence. You met people like that are like, why don't you see what I see? Right? You're awesome at that. Shine up the mirror for them. Like, fake, I see this. What are you seeing? Enthusiasm, that's another good word. Skill, they know how. Yeah, you've seen them do it before. It's on a past performance review. They've done that job before. And so sometimes they're transferable skills. I will say when I first got into leadership development facilitation, I hadn't done it before, right? Like any task, I hadn't done it before. But my ally, JT, he was awesome. He held up the light for me and said, yeah, but you've done this, this, and this before, right? You've led team training. You've led our strategic planning process. You've done this. You've been in front of groups talking. Same thing, Julie. You can do this too. So sometimes we don't give ourselves credit, and especially when I work with women, we don't give ourselves credit for our skills. And so sometimes it is a confidence issue over here. It's holding us back from really progressing to that area. So this is a shortcut map, again, to know when to ask versus when to tell. So always ask yourself that question. What is the task at hand? And then based on the task, Do they have the skill? Do they have the will? If not, this gives you a shortcut to knowing you direct, do you coach and direct, do you coach, or do you delegate? So those are some of the major leadership styles, and this helps us understand um, what's best for asking versus telling. So I want to dig into coaching now, and I liken coaching to be a communication detective, and it's all about asking open-ended questions. So if you think about the best questions to ask your team, the most highly motivating questions start with keywords. And there's a few more besides this, but I will say these are my go-to. This is the number one thing I learned from my coaching certification was how to ask a good open-ended question. Because I think we all intuitively know open-ended questions are better than closed-ended questions. But again, we often overestimate how many open-ended questions I ask. So just for the balance, humor me, the balance of today, just take an inventory of how many open versus closed-ended questions you ask. I promise more than 50% of them are closed. And so you got to practice this. And so if you think about, I'll demonstrate this with a question. So I could ask somebody, do you think this is the problem? Right? And what could they say? They could say yes or no, or they could agree with me and elaborate. It's pretty hard for them to disagree on that unless you have a lot of trust. So you're really not getting very deep in that conversation. That's a really bad question, in fact, to ask. So any question that begins with do or any real helping verb, do, could, should, would, all those words are closed. And we ask a ton of those questions. So instead, replace those questions with a powerful question word like a what or how. So instead of saying, do you think X? A better way, a way a coach would ask that question is, what do you think? It's actually an easier question to ask. So what do you think? Right? If you had someone do this to you, you're down one train of thought and they take a step back and they say, hey, what do you think about this? And you're like, that's what I'm venting about. But they really help get you to think much more deeply about it. And this is what promotes the beauty of self-discovery that we're going to learn about today. And a how question also does the very same thing. So what questions are very powerful? How? I love to ask people, I'm curious how you got there, right? How did you get to that decision? How does that impact the team? How does that impact the customer? How do you think we need to make this happen? Right? So hows and whats, they can't be answered with a simple yes, no, or one word answer. They're expansive. So this is why coaching tools are so powerful because they expand the dialogue. You learn something you didn't know before and you get to a deeper root cause on the barriers that are preventing someone from being successful, or a lot of times the mental barriers that they have almost against themselves. And so think about how you could reframe, think about the questions you ask of your team a lot, right? Think about what you say, what words come out of your mouth a lot, and just as a true coach would, reflect on it and think about how you make some of these switch ups. Other key phrases I would offer: help me understand is powerful. Please describe, also powerful. My favorite: tell me more. There's nothing more powerful when someone's really sharing something, perhaps private or vulnerable. Say, I'm so glad you shared that with me. Tell me more. You see how affirming that is? And of course, it has to be done genuinely. But if you hold the space and pause, and we'll talk about the power of pausing, you'll get a really meaty answer. Ryan had a question. What about a should you question? Yeah. Well, those are probably my least favorite, Ryan. You hit a hot spot here. So think about that one. Should you do this? What are we implying? That we know the answer and you should be doing this, and why aren't you? Well, it's not actually, we're not asking a question. We're tricking somebody to think we're asking a question. We're actually saying what our own opinion is usually and testing it and getting someone to agree with our opinion through misleading them on a question. So I severely dislike the should questions. Or shouldn't you just be doing this? It's like, well, no, but I'm glad you give me your input in the form of a question so I can tell you no. And as a leader, if you're in a position of authority, it's really hard for your team to disagree with you, no matter how much trust you have. And maybe you're having candid conversations all the time, and that's not the case for you. But most employees hold back when they're asked questions like that, and it's kind of offensive too. It's talking down to somebody. So should questions, I would really limit those as much as you possibly can. I've never heard a good one before. The other question word that's troublesome that sometimes people like is why. Why? Why did you do that? Think about how that makes you feel. Defensive? Yep. Most people, when you respond to a why question, is out of defense. And so, sometimes it's necessarily like maybe in a problem solving, like, why is this happening? Okay. But you can also replace the why with a what or how, and it's usually better. What's leading to this is another way of saying, why is this happening? Right. And so, just knowing the defensiveness, I steer clear of why questions. And by the way, if a question comes out of your mouth that you don't like, you can always take it back. So when you're in coaching mode, I love telling people, especially early on, I'm practicing coaching, right? So I might ask you a question and then I might correct myself because I'm practicing it, I'm learning it. So a lot of times, if I came out of my mouth like, do you think this? I'm like, oh, shoot, hold on just a second. What do you think about this? Right. So it's okay to take it back. It actually shows vulnerability for your team. Talk about modeling the way. It gives people permission to also make mistakes and take them back. So what a freeing environment where it's okay that we're not guarded and watching every single thing that comes out of our mouth and trying to be perfect. Coaching is not about perfection. There is no perfect way to do coaching. The tool I'm going to share with you is guidance. It's an an acronym that stands for 4 key areas of coaching questions, but it's not an end-all be-all. There are so many different coaching models out there, and I like a lot of them. I kind of borrow different ones and use different ones from time to time. So the tools we're going to dig into, and then I promise I'll get to the GROW model, is pausing and playback. So 7-second rule. Simple concept here. But what I'm asking you to think about is once you ask a powerful question. So if you ask a good what or how question, and we're going to work through a bank of those questions here in a moment. If you ask one of those questions, you need to be quiet. And you need to be quiet for a while. So the research shows that we get awkward at second 2, which that doesn't give anybody time to think about their answer. Most people need at least 7 seconds to think through their answers. So they need space. They need time to process it. They need headspace time because the question, if you're asking a good question and you're truly curious, it's probably not a question that they've thought a lot about, or maybe they've never thought about, or it's just simply not on their radar. And so they need time to think. So a good coach holds that space. That's what I meant when I said hold the space. Might sit back in their chair, might look off in a different direction, might smile, might nod their head of like, I think envision a therapist here, which by the way, a coach is not a therapist, but at first it might feel a little bit like therapy if you aren't having regular coaching conversations. I've had clients that have said that to me. I'm like, okay, we might rethink our approach if it feels like that. But, think about what a good therapist does. They sit back and they listen and they put it on you to come up with the answers. And I would argue a good coach, that is the one commonality with therapy, although it's completely different. Don't mishear me there. That is the one commonality of really giving someone the space to think and asking the question and letting it dangle, letting it be awkward for a good 7 seconds. So count in your head. I have clients that say, I will be curious. They have little mantras they play in their head. I'm listening, I'm listening, I'm listening 7 times. I used to pinch myself until I hurt myself, so I don't do that anymore. It gets a lot easier with time. I don't think of it as awkward at all anymore. I mean, maybe after 30 seconds, it get a little awkward. Like, okay, let me reframe that question. So by the way, you can jump in at any point and guide, but don't do it the first 7 seconds because then you just teach them to need you again. And it disrupts their thought process. I have clients that clench their molars. They focus on 3 bullet points. So here's the other fear. You're the fear of somebody elaborating forever, and these coaching conversations are somehow going to take hours instead of the usual 20-minute rant that I have with my employees. So while someone's going on, pay attention to 3 bullet points. And then if they're wandering and veering, you can jump in with a playback. And I love the playback. Playback is very effective. So good coaches kind of think about 3 key pieces of information that they're hearing from their team. Our brains can only absorb 3 pieces of information on our memory, in our working memory at any given time, unless you're taking copious notes, which good coaches do that. I do a lot of that in my coaching. But a lot of times if I'm just listening and really being present, because notes kind of take me away from being present, I can get 3 pieces in there. And once I've got my 3 pieces, I play them back and I say, what I heard you say was A, B, C. Their exact words, not my words. That's important. Let me play back what I just heard. A, B, C, their words, not mine. Based on A, B, C, this sounds important to you. Fill in the blank. So get comfortable with these, use this language, use your own. I usually find when I ask somebody, can I play back? Hey, you mind if I jump in here? Can I play back what I just heard you say? And that's a closed question, but I am asking for permission, which is appropriate to be closed, because I do want them to agree. I do want their permission to move forward. And so if someone's going on for, several minutes about something that has nothing and repeating themselves, let me jump in. I want to make sure I'm hearing you, right? Because when people ramble, that's why they don't feel like they're being heard. Or they really need the playback to really shine that light for them so they can help see maybe what they're not able to see. One more thing. So feedback came up front. So feedback, it can be a part of a coaching process, but it really is not part of the GROW model. Ideally, in a GROW model situation, the person has the skill, they don't have the will. So if you're just trying to beef up their will, they should be self-aware about the gaps that they're having, and they should be able to articulate them. Now, if they're not, if they're like a halfway skill, like just right on the fringe between those two at the top in that box I showed you, then I think you do need to give them some feedback. So before you jump into coaching mode, maybe you take a step back first. If you don't think they're self-aware, meaning you think if you start asking them some questions that they're going to look at you with deer in the headlights look, then go ahead and jump into some feedback. And the best feedback is short, sweet, concise, and to the point, and it has 3 key elements: situation, behavior, impact. It's called the SBI model. It's been around forever. I use it all the time. And the reason we don't give people feedback, especially constructive feedback, is because we're so afraid of hurting their feelings. We're afraid they're going to go off on us. We're afraid we're going to get in trouble with HR. I've heard all the excuses, and I promise you, if you use this model, the chances of those things happening are very, very low. Rarely, if I've had a client sit down with a team member and tee up the situation, practice positive intent, viewing the person as a positive person that had good intentions, or if they didn't have good intentions with the behavior, maybe it was unintentional. And they cover the basics: who, what, where, when, why this is important. So just real quick, I want to talk to you about this situation. In this situation last week when we were in this meeting, I know you had good intentions. I believe in you. But we need to talk about it. It's important because it has an impact on the team. Perfect tee up, right? 2-3 sentences. Then jump into behaviors, okay? Because now their radar's up and they're getting nervous. You don't want them to get defensive. So in that situation, in that meeting, I saw you do this. I heard you do this. The perception of that behavior was this. So again, 3 sentences. Then cover the impacts. So the impact, I used to work in healthcare. So to the patient, to the client, to the team, to the business. The impact, if that behavior continues, my fear is that people won't speak up in the next team meeting. Or my fear is that we won't get the results we need on that project. So what do you think? Enter the coaching process, right? So what does success look like? And this is where the GROW model bolts on super nicely. So if the person's not self-aware, I would argue situation, behavior, impact works really well. Laura said, in cognitive coaching, we don't say I heard. I learned to name their emotion in the content to help them be heard and navigate their thinking. Oh, good ad. Good ad. Yeah. Different ways of saying the same thing. I mean, I think you go with the language that you feel comfortable with. If you are in a more emotional space, I think that's absolutely perfect. To latch on, what I would say is use the words they're using, right? Where I've gotten into trouble with that is labeling an emotion in my word, not their word. That's the tricky part of coaching. You really want to keep it their language when you're playing it back. I've been called out on that before, and quite frankly, learned the lesson the hard way. So when you're labeling emotions, especially, make sure that you know the context and know the words that your clients are using or your team members are using. So I promised you this wonderful tool to use today. So I've had leaders literally cut this slide out and laminate it and put it up in their cubicle or underneath their keyboard or wherever they can see it, because it helps them think through difficult conversations. And the reason this model is so helpful is because it outlines the 4 key areas that you have to have a powerful coaching conversation. And what's great about this model is it really helps get to it provides a structure. It gets to the heart of the issue through a structured, effective process. This stuff feels fuzzy. It's soft stuff, right? It's hard to create some definition around it, but it does reinforce productive conversations, and you get at the heart of inquiry balance with advocacy. In today's leader, those things are equally as important. Enables the coachee to really break down an issue into factual parts. So it breaks up a big, hairy problem into smaller parts and supports the coachee in creating actions they're committed to personally. And it really empowers them. So 3 key skills I teed up in my list on the coaching side earlier was active listening, open-ended questioning, and self-discovery. And so sometimes people say refrain from advice. I struggle with that because if I'm focused on not giving advice, I'm probably going to give a lot of advice, right? Our brain's hearing, give advice, not the not do it part. And so I did this actually early on in my coaching certification. I made a list of all the words I should not use in coaching. Words like should, words like do, could, should. Also, tell me a little bit. That's also a big mistake I used to make is tell me a little bit. Because what am I telling? I only want to hear a little bit. I'm like, well, that's a nice way of saying, tell me more. Like, no, it's nice for me. It makes me feel better. Tell me more kind of puts the ownership on the other person. So what I would encourage you to do is think about the things you want to do. Think about these skills as positives, not what you don't want to do, but focus forward on the positive of what you do want to do. Your brain will hear it and your behavior in general absolutely maps to it. Yeah, Kalia just posted a question. Yep, the recording's being distributed. Yeah, you'll get that later today. And feel free to share. I know a number of people could not make it today, so you feel free to share. The playback will be available for the next 30 days. So this is the GROW model, and these are the 4 areas. So I'm going to go through each of the 4 areas, and as I'm doing this, your job is to brainstorm questions. So I'm going to give you some sample questions. If you like them, great. I'd encourage you to make it your own. You know, I'm most effective in my coaching process when I create my own questions, kind of put my own flavor or spin on it. Because if you're trying to follow a formula, it's going to be really hard. So the first step is, so assume the person is self-aware about the behavior. Maybe you've teed up feedback with that SBI model. Maybe you've had this conversation before. Maybe you just know that they know that they should know better. And so the first thing you want to do is ask a good open-ended question. So there's what and how questions, right? You want to ask something really broad here. So we're just starting the conversation. Doesn't mean it's going to last hours. Usually you can have a good coaching conversation in 15 minutes when you get good at this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on them to set a realistic goal. And I might even want it to be a SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So I might get to that later in the process, though that might not come right off the bat. I might be exploring opportunities for growth, but my job is really to listen and inquire, to discover potential barriers and challenges, because the next step is going to be the reality, which we're going to dig into. Why is this not happening? So our job here is simply to define what good looks like. And so I might ask that. I want to talk to you about X. What does good look like? What does success look like? What are the expectations on X? All right, so whatever subject it is, maybe it's we're not in our sales number. Hey, I want to talk to you about your sales goal. What's going on? Right? Tell me what good looks like. Tell me, paint a picture for me where that sales goal was being met. What would that look like? If we were to recalibrate that goal, what would be realistic to you? And I'm not saying you get to have that new goal, but what do you believe to be reality? Right, so you're getting their perceptions right now of really simply what the future could be. And ideally, there's a disconnect between the future and where they are now. Okay. And that's where the reality section comes in. So I started to kind of get down that line of questioning. I jumped ahead a little bit. Forgive me. Examine the current reality. So our job here is to create what I call pain. We want to quantify some pain here, because people don't change just because they want to change. No, they do if they want to change. So they don't change just for the sake of change because you want them to. They have to want it. And the only reason people change is if they're missing out on something. So that's exactly what you want to uncover here. What's happening right now, right? So your sales goal is here. You are here. Tell me what's going on. What is happening relative to that goal and issue? And you really want to inquire, you want to push it back on them. So here's where you might get some of the blame game. Well, this client fell through, or so-and-so didn't follow through. It's everyone else's fault, not mine, right? So then in that issue, I like to say, how are you contributing to the problem? What's something you're willing to own? Right? What are the things that you're specifically doing to drive that? What are you not doing? What is not happening is a great question. So it may not be about what's happening, and maybe things that are not happening that might be creating the pain and the reality. And we do want to eliminate irrelevant information. So if it becomes someone else's problem, if it goes down a rabbit hole of excuses, I would rein it right back in real quickly and jump in and say, "Hey, I'm hearing you," where the playback it works, hearing you say this. I would love to talk more about the goal we just set and what are the barriers to achieving that goal. See how with coaching, you can get somebody in without having to be forceful. You don't have to say like, "No, you're making excuses." That's not going to go well, right? Someone's only choice is to get defensive with that, to call them out like that. Instead, bring it back in and say, "Hey, do you mind if we get back to the goal? You mind if we talk about that?" That's why the goal is so important up front, because when you get permission and you get them to self-discover and articulate their own goal of what good looks like, then helping them understand that's not happening today. So the goal is up here, it's future. The reality is today, it's here, and it's not where it needs to be. Okay, so there's a disconnect. A lot of times, coaches go straight from goal to option. So we've got a goal. What do we want to do? If you don't spend time in the reality, it's not going to work. Right? Again, people don't change just to change. They change because they want to. And the only way they want to is if they're missing out on something, or they can articulate, "I want something I'm not getting today." So once we've painted the disconnect and we understand the pain points, we can uncover some options. And this is fun. This is the brainstorming part. So this is where it gets really hard not to advise. I love the question, "What's possible?" Let's brainstorm is a great question too. What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? You got to just keep asking questions. My favorite question to ask in this stage is, "What else?" So I heard you say this, this, and this. Play back their ideas. What else? What's the wildest idea you can think of? I love that question, because it's not the wild idea that wins, but the questions or the wild ideas that win. The ideas after those are usually what become really, really good like ideas. Like, "Whoa, that sounds like a good one. Let's talk more about that one." They might say, "Oh, it's not possible. There's no way the company will go for that." Like, say, I love in coaching just to say, "Well, let's say it is possible. What does that look like?" Right? Let's pretend. Now, the fear here is you might get somebody saying, "I don't know." And "I don't know" is really hard to handle as a coach, because, man, that's just like an invitation to jump right in and solve the problem for them, right? Which is not what coaching is. So if someone truly has the skill and they don't have the will, your only choice is to coach them. The telling isn't going to work. I rarely seen that work. Instead, when we're asking and we're in coach mode, you've really got to create the freedom for them to solve their own problem. Because if you jump in and give them the idea, then you've just made it about you. You've ruined all that positive momentum that made it about them and them personally owning it. People are much more likely to take action on ideas that are their own versus someone else's. Think about when you were a kid and your mom would tell you to do something versus when you decided to do something totally different. I practice this with my daughter all the time. I trick her a little bit and say, "Hey, getting ready in the morning, like, hey, what do you think? What do you think it's going to take to walk out the door in 5 minutes?" And she'll list off like, "That sound like great ideas. You should do that." Right? And that's not what coaching is, but self-discovery, leading them to the water and helping them decide to drink it is something that coaches do. And so here, if someone says, "I don't know," don't jump in. What I often say is, "What if you did know?" is one kind of Jedi mind trick in coaching. If that doesn't feel good to you, sometimes that feels a little creepy to me. I'll ask them, "Well, what if so-and-so was here? What if someone they know was there? What would they say?" Right? What ideas would they contribute? Then suddenly people have great ideas that they think are someone else's, but they're actually their own. So you've tricked them a little bit there too. And then if after the third question of like, "I want you to say it, like, tell me," if they really look at you like, "Julie, if I knew, we wouldn't be here." Say, "Okay, I'll jump in on the brainstorm, but every idea I give, I want 2 ideas from you." Create some parameters about it so they're not learning to have to need you again, because that's not what coaching is about. And then the final step, and we often skip this step. So I find most leaders are pretty good at the goal, good at the options, especially giving them the options, which is not what coaching is. They fail to do the reality and the will. So the last 5 minutes of any coaching conversation, I don't care if it's 2 hours or 20 minutes, you have to save 5 minutes to say, "What did we decide to do today?" This is where the action planning and the commitment start, and then schedule a follow-up time to meet. And that might just be a follow-up that you put on your calendar, a reminder to check in with them at the end of the week. It doesn't have to be a formal meeting. But if you want change, you have to inspect what you expect, right? We know this as leaders. Anything that's important to our business, we would inspect. So if this is important, we would inspect it. So if you don't up on them, that you're basically telling them it's not important, that it's not a priority. So, and the great thing about this is it starts to feel like babysitting to have to check up on them. So get advance permission. Hey, how would you like me to support you in this? What's one barrier I could take off your plate to help make this easier? What are the action steps? How do you want me to hold you accountable? When would you like to schedule time to review that? So now I want you to think about your favorite coaching questions. So go ahead and share in the chat, as you think through, if you just want to put like a G, an R, an O, a W, just so we know which section you're talking about. But make a list. I mean, if you don't walk away with this workshop with 20 coaching questions and you haven't been paying attention. So I want to make sure you have something actionable. Jump on the chat and share. What are some of your favorites? And you don't have to use mine. Please, please expand. There's so many more. What are your favorite coaching questions? Go ahead and jump on the chat. Love to hear from you. What questions would you add? What ones did you like? What other ones? Good. We're starting to see some come in. Awesome. What do you think? Yes. It's a lot of times it's the basic ones. What might be some strategies you're considering? Yeah. Yeah. All right. And I might take the word might out just to give you some candid feedback there. Words like little might weaken it a little bit. So I like just being very direct with my questions. What strategies are you considering? What does a successful look like in X? Yes. Good, good, good. So yeah, what does it look like? I love that. What do you think you are missing out on by not doing X? I love that one. That's a really good one. Man, you're going to get some pain there. Yeah. And this is part of the coaching when somebody realizes, like, I'm missing out. I want in. What do you think is the best approach? Yep. And that's a good one. In the option section, you want to prioritize. So I kind of skipped over that. What do you think is the best approach is a great segue into the will section as well. Other questions? Other thoughts? Well, save some time for questions at the end. So keep sharing those. I'm going to kind of wrap us up and then get into the kind of the commitment section. So I want you to think about a situation that warrants a coaching conversation. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat or want to ask a specific question about the difficult employee or the difficult conversation you want to have, do share those in the chat as well. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, I want to wrap up with one commitment, one specific thing you've learned as a result of today. So again, our learning objectives, what we promised you up front, was explain what a coach is versus a leader, right? And there's a lot of similarities there, but I think you noticed some really fundamental differences in the speed and the directness is what I heard from you. We also talked about when to coach, when to ask versus when to tell, when to coach versus when to direct and delegate. So that skill will, I hope you circle that, take that away, put that up somewhere in your office. It's a great framework to understand when to ask versus when to tell. And then the third piece is we covered the GROW model. So just pick one thing. We talked about active listening. We also talked about the pausing and the playback. So go ahead and jump on the chat. There's nothing like positive peer pressure to hold you accountable. Laura, yeah, the 4-box diagram is great. When to coach, ask, tell, delegate. Thanks, Laura. The 7-second rule. I love that. Inspect what you expect. Yes. I'm glad you picked up on that one. It's an old leadership adage, but an oldie but goodie. 7-second rule. Yeah, that one takes practice that for a week and it starts to stick. I start to breathe between sentences to help pausing. The 4-box diagram. Good. I'm glad you like that. Understanding the difference between coaching and leadership, but are needed, but at different times. Yeah. Pause. 7 seconds. Thanks, Robbie. Don't let issues fester and discuss them. Yes. Sweeping under the rug. The rug gets really big after a while. So remind yourself, yeah, I can procrastinate. Like we go into work on Monday, like I'm going to have that conversation, right? And you're like, oh, but I got really busy with meetings. We don't do what we don't want to do. Open questions. I like that a lot. Awesome. What and how questions. Thanks, Cami. All right, so I'll open it up now. If you have a scenario you want to share, if you have just open dialogue points that you want to share, the one thing I will say is So I am a speaker and a trainer. So I do this for a living. 100% of how I support my family has to do with speaking and training. So I wanted to put an offer out to you. If we haven't worked together, if we have worked together, but not for a while, I am available to speak at your organization or conference about things like diversity, things like inclusive leadership, subject we just talked about today, and career development. I do specialized programs in-house. I also do keynote speaking on these topics. And we do have a Pivot Point Leadership Academy that covers this and many more skills like candid conversations, communication, conflict, all that stuff. So we do a series. We kicked off a number of them across the country. We can do them virtually or live or a bit of both. So just know that that is something we're offering, as well as our Women's Leadership Academy. So this one's wrapping up this spring. Our next one's kicking off August 21st. So if you're interested, I'll drop the link in the email with the recording. Please do share. I fully expect the 20 seats to sell out. We've already have a couple women signed up for it. So it doesn't kick off till August, but if you want to save your spot, I don't think spots will be available after July. So please do grab your spot now if you're interested. It's a very affordable price point for an individual or your organization to support you. And then contact me. If you liked what you saw today, follow us. We post on LinkedIn every single day. And Next Pivot Point is where we are in the other social channels. And then you can send me a note at julie@nextpivotpoint.com. If any of this was of interest to you, just simply respond to my email with the recording this afternoon. And let me know what you're interested in, and we can set up a quick call to kind of talk about the leadership academies, the speaking, or the Women's Leadership Academy. So with that in mind, what are our commitments? What would you jump in on questions that you have in our closing minutes? Things we didn't cover or a situation you're wrestling with. I'm all ears. And while we're waiting for some questions to come on in the closing minutes, if you got to run, you got to run. I appreciate your undivided attention today. I will be sending the recording. I would just offer, probably the questions that I hear most often from my clients is like, Julie, this is great. I love the GROW model. I got my commitments, 7 seconds, pausing, playback, all that stuff's good stuff. But honestly, like, how do I just start the conversation? It's usually what I hear most. It's like ripping the Band-Aid and just doing it. The best tool I can offer is just being vulnerable. Use me as an excuse. Use this webinar as an excuse. Hey, I listened to this webcast and here's what I picked up. I'm learning about coaching skills and I just wanted to talk about this and practice using something that I learned, if it's okay with you. Go into the GROW model. Or you could also start with like, this conversation's hard for me. I don't like to talk about uncomfortable things, but I care about you as an employee, a teammate, a peer, whatever it is. And I want to talk to you about something that's kind of hard for me. Is that okay? Yeah, most people respond favorably to that. So vulnerability, that positive intent piece. Oh, I got some ideas on coaching. Okay, so good question being posed here. Would love some ideas on coaching on how to politically maneuver to make the right career moves and goals, especially when you have had a career goal and plan, but it gets changed by something you cannot control by male-driven team management. Well, unfortunately, all industries are male-dominated. So I have yet to find a female-dominated one. Even nonprofits are run by men. So this is the reality of the world we're in 2019, which I can't believe, but it is a reality. So that's number one. You're not alone. Number two, if you're having trouble getting your your career game plan in place and there's objections, or it sounds like things that aren't controlled by you, but controlled by others that may not know what you want, as I would first ask yourself the question, do they know what I want? Is it very clear? Do they know my career goals? And a lot of times we assume people know things that we know. It's a bias we all carry. So ask yourself that. If you think they truly do know and they're changing it, it's probably without bad intention. It may feel like their intentions aren't good, but they probably aren't. So I would re-communicate it and say, what am I missing here? My career goal is X. What do I need to do to demonstrate X? Right? And then once you get the answer from them, hold them accountable for it. Say, okay, I will demonstrate X and I'm going to come back to you in 3 months and ask you how I'm doing on X. And if they don't have a good excuse, then it's probably time to look for something else. But I wouldn't move on. I see a lot of women in male dominant spaces just throw up their arms and leave. And before you do that, make sure they know what you want, because they probably don't, and and give them a chance to put your plan in place. And if they still won't listen, then maybe you pursue something else, or look at another area. Maybe there's another pocket inside the organization that's more supportive. I would always look for good leaders. It's so much less about what you do on a day-to-day basis, and it's so much more about the people you work with, is what the research shows, and who you work with, and someone that challenges you to grow. So I would think if they're truly not listening, that's probably not a place you want to stay long term. Okay. Great question. Thank you for that. Stay in touch. I'd love to hear how that goes for you. I am going to conclude the webinar, and I will make the recording available this afternoon. Thank you for your undivided attention. You have been terrific, and have a great rest of your afternoon.